Before we begin, this is Data and Dissonance, and that means you are going to hear opinion, analysis, frustration, sarcasm, and a few uncomfortable truths that do not always fit neatly into a cable news segment. Tonight's episode deals with war, national security, federal spending, political leadership, and the very real cost that lands on American families when Washington makes decisions with numbers so big they stop sounding real. This is not an anti-military episode. This is not about rooting against America. This is about asking the questions every citizen should be allowed to ask when billions of dollars, military readiness, and American lives are on the line. So if you believe loving this country means never questioning its leaders, this may not be your kind of show. But if you believe supporting the troops means demanding clear missions, real accountability, and no blank checks from politicians, then welcome back.
There is a moment in every conflict where the slogans start running out of gas. At first, everything sounds clean. Strength, deterrence, peace through power, protecting allies, sending a message, making sure the bad guys know America still has teeth. And look, I believe in strength. I believe in deterrence. I believe evil exists in the world, and I believe weakness invites wolves to the front porch. But eventually, somebody has to walk into a hearing room, sit under those bright lights, and answer the question nobody in Washington likes hearing. How much is this costing? What is the goal? And how do we know when it is over? That is where we are today. The Iran war is now being talked about not just in terms of missiles, military pressure, and global strategy, but in terms of cost, stockpiles, readiness, and the administration's endgame. And that phrase right there, endgame, should matter to every American listening tonight, because we have lived through this before. We have watched wars begin with clean graphics, waving flags, and confident speeches, and then somehow turn into years of confusion, billions of dollars, broken families, exhausted service members, and politicians who suddenly act like nobody knows who made the first decision. And now, while all of that is happening, President Trump is also dealing with China, Iran, global energy pressure, and a country here at home where families are already stretched thin. Groceries are high, rent is high, insurance is high, gas is unpredictable, debt is crushing people. And every time Washington says, "Don't worry, we've got this," somehow regular Americans are the ones reaching for their wallets. So tonight we are talking about the war bill coming due. Not from a left-wing surrender angle, not from some weak America should hide under the bed angle. We are going to talk about it from the perspective of people who love this country, respect the military, understand the world is dangerous, but still believe conservative leadership should mean discipline, clarity, accountability, and no blank checks. Because strength without strategy is not strength. It is expensive confusion wearing a flag pin. Let's get into it. Now let's start with the part Washington always tries to bury under language that sounds important enough to end the conversation. They call it operational cost. They call it readiness posture. They call it force projection. They call it regional stabilization. And look, some of those words matter. I am not mocking the military side of this, because there are men and women sitting in hot zones right now doing exactly what they were trained to do. But politicians love using military language as a fog machine. They say enough serious-sounding phrases, and they hope regular Americans stop asking simple questions. How much is this costing? What is the actual mission? What does winning look like? And how many times are we going to get told, "Just trust us," by the same class of people who could not balance a checkbook with a calculator, a tutor, and divine intervention? And that is where this hits home for regular people. Because when a family cannot pay rent, they get told to budget better. When a guy loses his job, he gets told to hustle harder. When a small creator cannot afford to keep a merch store open, nobody shows up with a $1 billion emergency package. But when Washington gets wrapped around another foreign conflict, suddenly there is always money somewhere. Suddenly the couch cushions of the federal government start coughing up billions like they have been hiding poker winnings from Aunt Linda. And the people at home are sitting there saying, "Hold on, I thought we were broke." That is the part that makes people angry. Not because they hate the military, not because they want Iran to get away with anything, not because they think the world is safe. People are angry because they are tired of being told there is no money for them, no money for the border, no money for veterans, no money for struggling families, no money for small businesses, no money for the working class. But somehow there is always money when the emergency has a foreign policy label on it. Now, let me be clear. Iran is not innocent. Iran has been a problem for a long time. The regime is hostile, dangerous, and has spent years playing games with terror networks, nuclear pressure, shipping lanes, and every other lever it can grab. I am not sitting here saying America should roll over and let bad actors run the world. That is not me. That is not this show. But there is a massive difference between strength and open-ended spending with unclear objectives. There is a difference between defending American interests and letting the mission expand until nobody can explain where the exit door is. And conservatives, of all people, should understand that difference. Because if America first means anything, it means American troops, American taxpayers, American readiness, and American families are not treated like unlimited credit cards. You do not get to spend years yelling about debt, inflation, waste, and reckless government spending, then suddenly act like billions of dollars are pocket change because your guy is in office. That is how you lose credibility. That is how regular people start saying, "So fiscal responsibility only matters when the other team is signing the checks?" And honestly, they would have a point. Real conservative leadership should be able to say two things at once. Number one, Iran cannot be allowed to threaten America, our allies, global shipping, or nuclear stability without consequences. Number two, the American people deserve a clear mission, a clear cost, a clear timeline, and a clear explanation of what success looks like. That is not weakness. That is adulthood. That is stewardship. That is what separates serious leadership from expensive theater. And let me say something from the veteran side of my brain here. The military can do amazing things. The people on the ground, in the air, on ships, in rescue units, in maintenance bays, in command centers, those people can pull off things most civilians will never understand. But they are not magic. Equipment breaks, missiles get used, aircraft need maintenance, fuel burns, people get exhausted, supply chains matter. You cannot just say, "We're America, we'll figure it out," and act like that is a strategy. That is not a strategy. That is a bumper sticker with a Pentagon parking pass. The other piece here is China, because China is watching. They are watching how much this costs. They are watching whether our weapon stockpiles are being drained. They are watching whether our leaders can explain the mission. They are watching whether America can fight, negotiate, replenish, and stay united at the same time. Our enemies and rivals do not just measure strength by aircraft carriers and missiles. They measure staying power. They measure whether the people at home still believe their leaders know what they are doing. And this is where Trump has to be careful. I support Trump. I voted for strength. I believe this country needed somebody who would stop apologizing for America existing. But support does not mean silence. Support does not mean turning your brain off. In fact, if you support a leader, you should want that leader challenged before bad decisions become permanent decisions. Trump can be right that Iran must not be allowed to push America around. He can be right that China needs to see strength. He can be right that weakness from past administrations helped create some of this mess. But he still has to answer the basic question: what is the plan that gets America out stronger than when we went in? Because peace through strength only works if there is a strategy behind the strength. Otherwise, you are just spending money, burning equipment, exhausting people, and hoping the next press conference sounds confident enough to calm everybody down. And regular Americans are way past the point of being impressed by confident press conferences. They want receipts. They want a plan. They want to know what success looks like. And let's talk about how foreign policy jumps off the map and lands right on your debit card. When shipping lanes get threatened, when oil markets get nervous, when energy prices spike, that cost does not stay in some diplomatic memo. It hits gas stations, it hits trucking, it hits groceries, it hits heating and cooling, it hits small businesses, it hits everything. That is why war is never just over there. War is a tax. Sometimes it is a tax paid in blood. Sometimes it is a tax paid in debt. Sometimes it is a tax paid at the pump. Sometimes it is paid by the young service member who misses birthdays, anniversaries, and first steps while politicians argue about messaging. And sometimes it is paid by the single mom staring at a grocery total, wondering how the same cart got so much more expensive in 6 months. That is the part Washington never seems to feel. The people making these decisions have drivers, staffers, government phones, speaking fees, retirement plans, donors, lobbyists, think tanks, and book deals waiting for them when they leave office. The people paying for the decisions have overdraft fees, shut-off notices, maxed out cards, and kids asking why the fridge looks empty again. That is not just economic pressure. That is moral pressure. And every leader in Washington should be forced to look those people in the eye before treating another $1 billion like it is just a rounding error. Now Democrats are going to use the cost of this war to attack Trump. That is obvious. Some of them do not care about the troops, the strategy, Iran, China, or readiness nearly as much as they care about turning the number into a campaign ad. Fine, that is politics. But Republicans cannot respond by pretending the number does not matter. If you believe in fiscal discipline, then believe in it when it is inconvenient. If you believe in accountability, then demand it from your own side too. If you believe in America first, then remember that America includes the families who are tired, broke, overworked, and still expected to stand up straight every time Washington sends another bill down the pipe. And Democrats do not get a free pass either. Spare me the sudden concern about spending if you were quiet every time money flew out the door for something you liked. Spare me the lectures about restraint if your entire worldview is built on government spending until the printer catches fire. The American people are sick of selective outrage. They are sick of politicians treating morality like a jersey color. They are sick of people who discover principles only when the other team is holding the pen. What I want is simple. I want America strong. I want Iran contained. I want China watching us and thinking twice. I want the troops supported, equipped, and brought home when the mission is done. But I also want answers. I want the administration to explain the end game. I want Congress to stop performing and start doing oversight like adults. I want Republicans to remember that America first is not supposed to mean spend first, explain later. And I want Democrats to stop pretending they discovered fiscal responsibility 5 minutes after a Republican entered the White House. Because the war bill always comes due. The only question is whether Washington pays attention before it lands on the kitchen table. And right now, that bill is already showing up. It is showing up in the budget. It is showing up in weapons stockpile questions. It is showing up in energy pressure. It is showing up in every American who is tired of being told there is no money for regular people, but somehow endless money for crisis management overseas. You can support strength and still demand strategy. You can support the military and still question the politicians. You can oppose Iran and still refuse to hand Washington a blank check. You can believe America should lead the world and still believe leadership starts with being honest to your own people. That is not isolationism. That is not weakness. That is not betrayal. That is common sense. And apparently, common sense has become the most radical foreign policy position in Washington.
Before Artie brings this one home, let's pause for a second and talk about what keeps independent voices alive when the big machines keep getting louder. Normally, this is where I would tell you to hit the merch shop, grab the hoodie, the mug, the hat, the coffee, and wear the brand like a warning label for people who still think cable news is a balanced breakfast. But right now, we are being honest with you. The shop is temporarily closed because this show is not backed by corporate sponsors, political committees, billionaire donors, or a mysterious nonprofit with a patriotic name and a bank account larger than a small country's defense budget. But Data and Dissonance is still here. The mic is still on. The message did not die just because the budget got punched in the mouth. If you want to support the show right now, the best thing you can do is simple. Listen, share, follow, subscribe, leave a review, and send this episode to someone who still thinks everything is fine because the television said so. Independent shows do not survive because algorithms suddenly grow a conscience. They survive because listeners decide the conversation matters enough to spread it. And yes, Data Dissonance is actively looking for sponsors. If you are a small business, veteran-owned brand, coffee company, apparel brand, local Colorado business, author, musician, or anyone who believes independent voices still matter, this show is open for partnership. We are not looking for someone to control the message. We are looking for people who believe the message deserves a fighting chance. Now back to Artie.
At the end of the day, this is not complicated. I want America strong. I want our enemies to understand consequences. I want our troops protected, equipped, respected, and never sent into confusion because politicians were more focused on looking tough than being clear. I want Iran to know America is not weak. I want China to know America is not distracted, broke, divided, and bluffing. But I also want our leaders to remember that the American people are not an endless fuel tank. You cannot keep drawing from them forever and call it patriotism. Real patriotism is not blind trust. Real patriotism is not clapping every time somebody says national security. Real patriotism is loving the country enough to ask uncomfortable questions before mistakes become memorials. It is supporting the troops enough to demand they are not sent into unclear missions with moving goalposts. It is respecting taxpayers enough to explain why billions are being spent, what they are buying, and how this ends. So tonight, that is the line. Support America, support the troops, take Iran seriously, watch China carefully, but demand answers, demand discipline, demand a plan, because the war bill always comes due. And when it does not show up at a lobbyist house first. It shows up at yours. It shows up in the pump, the paycheck, the grocery aisle, the family budget, and the quiet stress nobody on television ever seems to notice. And if Washington wants the American people to keep carrying these costs, then Washington needs to start treating the American people like they deserve the truth. Not spin. Not slogans. Not just trust us. The truth. That is the bare minimum. And somehow, in 2026, the bare minimum sounds revolutionary. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data Dissonance is brought to you by the creative work behind the microphone. The stories, the books, the music, and the stubborn refusal to quit just because the road got rough. If you like the way this show cuts through the noise, check out Artie's Caleb Rourke thriller series, including The Covenant Protocol and Black Echo Rising, where power, secrecy, loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of standing up all collide in fiction with teeth. And while the merch shop is temporarily closed, the mission is not. Data Dissonance is still building, still fighting, still looking for sponsors, and still bringing you the kind of independent commentary that does not come pre-approved by a corporate boardroom. You can support the show by listening, following, subscribing, sharing the episode, checking out Artie's books and music, and helping this independent voice reach the next listener. This has been Data Dissonance. The system gets louder, the questions get sharper, and the mic stays on.